Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming to my talk about how to design a typeface. I hope you find it really interesting, as fascinating as I do, and I'd like to thank the illustrious Frank Romano for having me and in this marvelous place, Museum of Printing. It's just a tremendous honor to be here. So the talk is about how to design a typeface. And, I find it endlessly fascinating myself. This was actually a drawing of me done by our son when he was about 10. And I just love it. So it's just a fascinating thing. We actually call it Little Joe. And it's just fascinating to me. The interesting thing about typography and type design is that I think every one of us here who are designers already know that design actually rules the world. Design, like marketing, has such a pervasive influence on all of our lives that it's really interesting to note that typography within design actually sort of rules design. If it weren't for typography and what it adds to layout and how it can complement illustration and photography in interesting layout, the world would be a very different place. And so I've always really enjoyed being able to contribute my own ideas to the world of typography and the historical canon, and hopefully will all prove to be seen as worthwhile and a positive contribution to typography. This is what you're looking at for all the slides is actually the lowercase from my design called TF Bryn Mawr, which I created starting in the late 70s and first released through Linotype Company in January of 1984. And then after Photographer came out around 1985 or so, I set about completely redrawing it and respacing it again and all of that, because the world had changed by then since Linotype had released it. Everything was going to the desktop, the Mac was coming out, everything was going to be more well resolved and all of that. So hopefully you'll find it to be an interesting thing to illuminate the topics as we go. The interesting thing about getting into typography and type design as a subset of the graphic arts is that there are a number of different things that you can do while you're setting out to change the world. These are, and that, it's a goal, right? I mean, we're going to get into typography and type design because we want to affect change. And so you have to decide, well, okay, how much of a business do I really want to make this, and how am I going to approach it? There are a number of different considerations. There's just the design. Then there's the production aspect of it, and Frank actually has some wonderful production drawings up here of some Linotype characters by Dwiggins from the 1940s that are just fascinating to look at. So there's this whole production aspect, and then how far are you going to take it with sales and marketing, and how much are you going to care about the customer at the end of all of it? There's been a lot of conversation over the decades, maybe the last 80, 90, 100 years now, about respecting the reader. It's all about what you're giving the customer and how you expect the customer to be able to use the typefaces or fonts as well. I think we all know that since the 1980s, typeface and font have sort of become identical in meaning, right? In many ways. Of course, we all owe quite a lot to Gutenberg and the invention and how he produced the Bibles and all the colorization of them that came afterwards also. It's sort of this really interesting, fascinating deferred collaboration. You know, people would buy them as black and white, and then they would come back and do all this interesting engrossing. You know, it's splendid. So I wanted to make the point going into this that as type designers, we have to recognize and never forget that we all stand on the shoulders of giants. And Lance Heidi here is certainly one of them, and there's a lot of others. And you know, there are some here like Les Usherwood of Typesetra was another hero of mine, and he should be on the list, and I forgot to add him to the list. But it's just an amazing list of talent, and as you might go and look up the contributions from each of these people, you know, they're all just amazing. I mean, for example, here's a consumer example. If you ever watched the old Mary Tyler Moore show, you know, the interesting typeface that the Mary Tyler Moore was set in, that was Pino, designed by A.M. Cassandra, who was a poster designer and graphic designer. And these things have profound effects on everything that we interact with, you know, whether it was like the Mary Tyler Moore show and how it set up this great positive effect for how we looked at her character in the show and all of that, right? So all these people have had, in their own way, just amazing effects on our lives behind the scenes. As you get into considering a career in type design by itself, or while you're working full-time like I did as an art director, graphic designer, creative director over the decades, you'll find that it's both a strategic and an aesthetic journey. The aesthetic is the much more obvious, right? You're making decisions about the shapes of your letter forms. Hopefully, you have an interest in developing your own style. People like Ed Bengat, for example, who was in the list, responsible for so many amazing typeface designs, in my opinion, you know, developed his own look and feel, his own style. It's as obvious as you stare at the work after a while as though it were his signature, you know. And these things can come to really imbue the design itself and make the design work. And like I was saying earlier, there's also a strategic side to this, depending on how much you want to get into the business side of it yourself or work with a distributor or reseller. I think the most important thing is that the craft always needs new voices. Every typeface design, every font design is a singular voice, you know, and it carries through all the different font families and all of that. And working also on the graphic design and art direction side of it in ad agencies and at publishers over the decades, I can tell you that the appetite for new fonts and typefaces is absolutely insatiable. And so the more that you can do as a type designer to add to the canon or the catalog or the selection of what's already out there, that's not only going to benefit you, it's going to benefit the entire design industry tremendously. It's going to benefit all of the designers and ad agencies' clients because it's giving them a unique tone of voice to go forth with and spend their advertising dollars with and all of that. So the effect is on multiple layers. And it's endlessly fascinating. It takes a lot of drive, as my wife Carol here will tell you, who's been patient with me for so many decades. You really have to spend a lot of time perfecting your work. I'm still perfecting. I'm still trying to perfect my work after all these decades. And so I wanted to make the point that you have to be the kind of person who's very dedicated. It's probably like the most extreme form of ADHD that you need, you know, that kind of thing. And So I thought I'd have a little fun here by taking us all out to play in the freeway for a minute and come up with a little traffic Rorschach test. If you get behind some Volvos or Toyotas, for example, that have these kinds of taillights on them, if for somebody like me, I say, oh, well, that looks like a Seraph, you know? And, maybe a lot of people wouldn't, but, you can go so far as to, I think this was a Toyota. It's like, oh, Seraph feet. People like to call Seraphs feet for some reason. And so I thought, well, this is kind of funny. And if you're like that, then yes, you have what it takes to become a typeface designer. It takes a lot of drive. You can become as famous, and what's the other reason why you would do it? Because you can become famous across the entire gulf of typography. And apart from the political joke, I like the use of the word gulf here because I think it helps make the point that, the field is wide open. The opportunity is wide open. It's this gigantic gulf of opportunity and waiting to be filled, So I thought it was an interesting play on words for that reason, too. People are often confused about where and how to begin. You can start off with sketches, like I did while I was babysitting while I was a teenager. I was lucky enough to have parents that bought the famous artist school course for me and loved it, right? They have a book on, in one of the 3 books, they have a section on poster design. And there was something about that really got me interested in typefaces. So as I was babysitting my brothers and babysitting neighbors' kids to make more money as a teenager, I would sit there and sketch letterforms. And but after you do all that, what are you going to do with them? So it's a big question. What will you draw? A lot of times people get into type design after working on a couple of logos and getting fascinated about how letter forms can interact as they sit side by side and how you might have to change some of the shapes of the serifs or whatever in order for them to knit together a little bit more than they might as they might have come from a foundry. And that was part of the way it started for me. When you get into drawing a font, you probably know, if you've looked at like the glyphs table in Adobe Illustrator, for example, some fonts have 256 characters, some pro fonts have quite a few more. Chinese, for example, displayed over here, has quite a few more. How many are you going to draw? How far are you going to take this newfound fascination? So then there are other opportunities. You can try to link up with an ad agency or a graphic design studio or consultancy like Landor or Future Brand or Interbrand or somebody like that. Or JKR, for example, is another one right now who's done this terrific branding font series for Burger King that you can see in their stores and menu boards and all this, and it's wonderful. You can try to become aligned with one of these companies and start doing branding fonts for them. And it can be a very lucrative direction. Or instead of just proprietary branding fonts, might you want to create fonts that are for public sale, like we did? And you can actually do both, and we have. You can come up with a type catalog, with lots of faces in them. And at the same time that you're doing these for public sale, you can also take on private commissions. And so that's an interesting couple of different things that are always fascinating about the profession. I think Frank would agree that the type industries had plenty of copycats. So the number one thing I would say is try to go beyond what inspires you to create something that's truly new. Study the masters, never stop learning, but realize when you have to jump from that path and then create your own path into the future. It's really important. Don't get pulled into a career of just making copycats. The type industry's had just way too much of that over the decades. This was always an interesting thing to me once I realized that focus on creating what's not there. As you go through many of the type catalogs that you'll find from different manufacturers, large or small, you can start to realize what's missing. And so what is that gap to be filled, right? And that can lead you to some really interesting solutions that can drive your new original type design. And again, designers like art directors, graphic designers, creative directors, publication designers, web developers, they need all the originality you can muster. I don't know about you, I've had enough of Google fonts by now and their blandness. I've had enough myself of how they've become accepted because of the way they've been marketed in, and much of typography in layout has suffered as a result. If you are somebody that can go back and look at a lot of design done in the 60s, 70s, and 80s versus afterwards and into today and after the web and social media and all this, you'll see how much more bland it is today, largely because of the influence of Google fonts. And it's worth taking a look back because there's a whole lot of creativity that got pushed aside for really no reason at all. So it's interesting to take a look and then focus on what's not there today that you might have a big idea for that you can fill that gap with. An interesting thing that I got into back in about 1974 or 75 was working with a local metal linotype shop that was just getting photo typesetting in. This was a negative master that was attached to something that was kind of like a paperclip that would fit into the linotype, the Mergenthaler Linotype VIP typesetter. And I was always one of these people that would hang out in press rooms and at the trade typesetting shops while I was picking up the jobs from them, because I always wanted to get absorbed into how all the stuff actually got done, you know? And so I was talking to the owner of this little tiny typesetting shop that was not a room much bigger than this one, called B.F. Martin down in Norfolk, Virginia, where I'm from. And lamenting the fact that I had this type design that I was calling Palm at the time, P-A-L-M. And wouldn't it be interesting to be able to actually set this real estate brochure that I was the art director on in this design? John Hathaway, the owner at the time, just said to me, and this was just completely spontaneous conversation at about like 8 o'clock at night one day. Oh, well, I've got one of these little linotype film strips in the drawer that got torn. I can't use it because it was accidentally torn. I said, oh, really? Can I take a look at it? Because I hadn't actually seen one before. And he gets it out of a drawer. And I said, well, John, you've got a darkroom here. How about if we make a master with letter forms from my Palm design, oversized, and take that down on his copy camera, you know, to make a negative. And he said, great, let's try it. And lo and behold, it actually worked, and I was able to actually set a 16-page real estate brochure for a local Virginia Beach real estate developer at the time. And so we actually hacked a linotype film strip in order to be able to do this. And that was my first experience with actually being able to use one of my type designs to set a commercial project. So it was fascinating, and it all came about completely by accident, really. Palm later became the basis for my type family that you're looking at, the lowercase of in the headlines and captions, called TF Bryn Mawr. And so to get back to how to get into the industry, again, it helps to define your goal and how serious you want to be about it. Do you want to just dabble in it from time to time, maybe on a weekend or something? Do you really want to form a commercial type business and go through the business of making it an LLC and incorporating and doing the real approach to it, like I did? You know, it's all fascinating. Do you want to come up with some sketches and try to sell them to a digital foundry? As we've been operating Treacy Faces over the decades, I've had plenty of budding designers come to me with designs. Would you be interested in publishing this? And, you know, they're in various states of undress, I guess I would say. You know, they're not necessarily ready for commercial sale at that point. And so you have to look at it objectively and with your creative director hat on and say, okay, well, is this the kind of design that is ever going to be popular? I don't really put an emphasis on how many people are actually going to get interested and actually license it over time. It's more of a creative consideration, but you know, you don't want to make a decision that's just plain dumb either, right? So you want to give it some business consideration. And then what I do is, if I go forward with it, then I actually will collaborate with the designer and make sure it's all completely drawn properly with the proper balance. It's all spaced with the proper balance, fidelity, and then add kerning pairs to it to take advantage of setting it with what I like to call a natural fit. The most difficult approach is the approach that I took, which was starting an independent do-it-yourself type foundry. I find it to be the most satisfying. You know, it's endlessly fun to me. But those are all the things. The single most important thing is not the software. Like one of the reasons why I got into this tangent was people put an emphasis on the software first. The single most important thing has got to be the quality and differentiation of your creative idea. Just as in advertising, you hear luminaries like the designer George Lois say, the big idea is everything. It's the same thing in type design. It all starts with a great idea. And once you have that, or you have a couple of those in hand, then put an emphasis on locking yourself in a room like I did and learn the software inside and out and decide, now that there's some variety of them, decide which of them might be the best software interface for you. Do you want to work in just black and white? Do you want to work in color? You know, there's a lot of different considerations. The interfaces have a lot of similarities and differences at the same time. So, you know, it's kind of a personal decision as much as it's a professional decision. And you want to give yourself time to try out several different of the predominant softwares and give yourself a chance to learn them and figure out, because you're going to be using these, you know, like I have, you know, you're going to be using these for 30 years or more. Which ones are best for you? So it's a lot of little decisions along in there. One of the next is differentiation again. And this is from an article that I wrote that appeared in Personal Publishing magazine in 1990 or so about how I designed my TF Forever Sans Serif series. I was, the catalyst for this, for me, was I had used a lot of sans serifs, loved a lot of designs like Franklin Gothic, the various ITC versions, and all of this, and yet got really frustrated that there wasn't enough variety. And so I started by making little comparisons for myself in various ways about what was I actually frustrated about. Again, these are the kinds of things that can lead to your own original idea. So that's why it's really important. And it's fascinating to compare what at the time were a number of most used sans serifs and how they differed by X height, the height of the lowercase, how the shapes differed. It's fascinating to me that as much as I love, again, my own personal opinion, as much as I love faces like Cable and ITC's version of it, a lot of things about this shape that I look at in here that is just kind of gawky and not how I would do it. So, and this is my lowercase a from my TF Forever. By the way, this one here. And it was just this interesting journey to get to the balance. How tall was this area within the total height of the lowercase? How tall was this going to be in order to give it the right kind of stature and strength and meaning versus all these other very popular designs. It takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of time to work out how the decisions that you make in a book weight or a basic light face text weight like the lowercase a that you see there, how that changes as you get through the heavier bold and extra bold weights. And then there's the whole consideration of what happens when you go to italic. Do you want to stop with a pseudo italic where it's just slanted 12 degrees or so to the right and you don't change the characters? Or like with A, for example, where it changes to what you might describe as an O with a stick on the end of it. It's just an endless bunch of fascinating decisions to make. This is my TF Bryn Mawr that evolved from my original design called Palm. And what's interesting about this was the version that I had redrawn and redigitized by around 1987 or 88 after Linotype had first released it on their older VIP system and with their, at the time, older technology called Icarus that they used to digitize it from my original drawings. Look at the text especially, how evenly it fits, right? Everything is very easy to read, and this compares to, and here this is a kid's book, right? This is another point I want to make as an aside, that you never know where you're going to find your typefaces used. And this is the other absolutely fascinating thing about it. You don't always know from who licenses the fonts where they're going to go and how they're going to be used. We've been very lucky to have many of my type designs used by major and medium-sized and smaller publishers over the decades. And here's a little tiny publisher that just thought it was fun and interesting for a kid's book. Now, by contrast, about 1985 or 86, after Linotype had released the original cuts of Bryn Mawr as they had digitized them, here it is, this high-end art book that's about that thick. And to my shock and horror, they released it without any pruning pairs. This composition happened to be flush right, and I cut off some of it going under the book cover here. But imagine how I felt when I had taken such care to design these to fit so well together. And you look at how the lowercase fits well together, and yet it's all betrayed by it not coming out with kerning. And I was talking to Frank about this before, that the way you used to have to buy fonts for composition, if you were a photo typesetting, local photo typesetter shop back in those days, was you'd buy the fonts. They had 0 kerning in them, and you relied on the operator to take you seriously as an art director or graphic designer, that you not only wanted to have things closed up with minus tracking or kerning, as you would see it in programs like Illustrator and Quark Express and others today, -1, -2, -3, -10, whatever. But I also want to fix. I'm an art director. I also want to fix special cases as well, right? Like what goes on with some of these numbers back in those days. So once I saw what had been going on back in those days, that drove me to want to take type even further. And not only fascinating to me to see how art directors and graphic designers will make use of the fonts, but when they do it sort of badly, or they don't really care about all the details, it's fascinating to see also. I don't know how many of you might be aware of dry transfer lettering, like Letraset and ChartPack, that were prevalent in design. You would buy these sheets in art supply stores and use them with a non-repro blue guideline and rub them down with a stylus or a ballpoint pen, one after the other, and get really good at all the base alignment, as you go. And I was lucky enough to get 2 variations of a design that I created called Starlight and Starbright, produced by a company that was almost as big a player in the dry transfer type market as Letraset was. It was called ChartPack. And they're still around today, I believe in Massachusetts. And but they're kind of in a different business than they were in back then. But I believe they're still around. I actually last looked into it about 5 years ago, and they're still around. But after the Mac hit and desktop publishing software hit and all of that, dry transfer lettering went away, because it was automatically composable now for the individual. You didn't have to rely on dry transfer lettering sheets anymore. When I look at what I wanted to do with typography, and looking back on how I view my contributions to the industry, hopefully it errs on the quality side, and that's what I've always wanted. Our own type collection consists of 500 different faces at the moment. We're going to be coming out with many more. In 1995, I was lucky enough to take over another company called the Headliners, who was a prevalent player in the film strip headline setting area. You might hear of another company called Photo Lettering Inc., and there were some other ones that were major and middleweight players in it. And what was interesting was I started seeing how this headline setting company called the Headliners was adapting to digital from the earlier decades. They started in 1957 or 1960, became a major player, franchised their headline fonts to the larger regional trade typesetting shops worldwide. I think at their zenith, they probably had 60 or 80 different franchises to set headlines. And when digital was coming in, along with the Mac and desktop publishing software and all of that, they were floundering. And it just coincidence at the time, I started noticing what I was seeing in their catalogs. I had, in my commercial assignments at agencies, had been making use of a lot of their headline software for the previous decade and a half. So I was really sort of bummed to see them sliding. And so I called up the owner, who I'd never met, started to have some meetings out there. And on the second and third meeting, and I had no idea I'd even seen this. This was a magazine out of Belgium or someplace that's still around, but it's only online today. Lurzer's Archive, or it now goes by LA when you look them up online. It's a terrific magazine because it catalogs all kinds of phenomenal creative design and advertising work from all over the world. Every issue is just endlessly fascinating, and I took a chance in 1988 or so and spent $2,000 on running a full-page ad showcasing my Habitat and Habitat condensed type family. And lo and behold, the owner of Headliners, we were sitting across a desk, from each other like this. He goes into his desk drawer, pulls out his own copy of this, and he says, "Joe, when I saw this and how this set, I knew you were the one to take over my company." And of course, my jaw dropped because I was there thinking, well, maybe I can help them out with marketing their extremely well-known and well-liked typefaces. And I had no idea that he might be interested in retiring and getting out of it, and didn't understand digital and all that. And so I suddenly had to set my own plans aside for typefaces of my own that I wanted to draw digitally and release, and repair a lot of the work that was done on digital versions of Headliners fonts going forward, and then again put on my creative director's hat and visualize and draw weights and versions and italics for fonts where they had just never had the time or inclination to get around to doing these variations, but I could see that there was commercial potential in doing this, And so for some faces where they had only created, just as an example, where they had created like 5 weights, and I fleshed out some of these to 10 or 20 weights, all of a sudden we would start selling 10 or 20 at a time, rather than just 1 or 3 or 5 or something. So that was the way this whole story played out, but it was a total shock to me at the time. I think other things that also helped was at the time when we entered the market, and Frank saw this at his TypeX Expo in the 1980s after we launched Treacy Faces. As you'll see in most of the specimen books here from the 1950s, 60s, 70s, most of the world of type was using rather bland booklets, endlessly fascinating typefaces, but rather bland art direction with red and black in sort of like a Germanic style, or trying to emulate a Germanic style if they were a company that wasn't from Germany. And so there's a lot of this sameness. Coming from an advertising and art direction background like I did, I know about the importance of photography and metaphor and layout and all of this. And so I licensed a local photographer in Philadelphia, where we were at the time, to take this photograph from me, and created packaging that was completely different from everybody. I also had a fly sheet in here with instructions, and at the time, as Lance will remember, people like Adobe and Agfa had booklets talking about everything you needed to go through to install your fonts. As a user myself, I realized that this could be a whole lot simpler, and so that's what we put on there. And we had my wife Carol and I were manning this little pipsqueak of a 10 by 10 foot booth at Frank's TypeX, and I had all these major manufacturers reps coming up to our table saying, "Look at that! Look at what they've done." So that was just really funny to me. Everything was on floppy disk back in those days, so I made this little die-cut pocket that the floppy disk would fit into, and we had these little decorative holders that held the floppy disk in position, so that when the user received this, and in those days people were often ordering this by FedEx or DHL from us from all over the world, they would get this and, hopefully be entranced by the mystique of the collection, So many more faces, and as you can see, I hope from the variety here, with just these little hints of what's possible in terms of shape and how you might use color with them, whether this particular kind of color palette is palatable to you or not. Hopefully, you see the possibility that typography provides the graphic designer and packaging designer, layout artist. Some of my other contributions, you can draw a line between before and after. Not every manufacturer picked up on these. I was actually laughed at by a panel discussion I went to at the PostScript Haters Club in New York. When was this? Probably 1990 or 92 or something like that. Like, I was putting an emphasis on spending a lot more time than many of the manufacturers did on natural fit through what I saw as being more aggressive letter spacing than previous, and adding kerning to that was comprehensive. Where most manufacturers at the time, if you open up their public AFM files, these text files that came with your PostScript fonts at the time, and looked at the kerning table, you would see that many of them had 0 kerning pairs. Many of them had an average of 90, somewhere around there. And when I discovered that this was going on while the Macintosh came out, and because of Steve Jobs' interest in calligraphy from his time he spent bopping in and out of Reed College, that he took an interest in providing not only fonts on the Macintosh, but in the programming behind the scenes of the OS, he actually put in support for 2,000 kerning pairs at the time, right from the very first 1984 Macintosh. I found that out by spending the money to become an Apple certified developer at the time. I wanted to make sure, this is another interesting thing about becoming your own business, you want to make sure you've covered all the bases and take care of understanding everything that goes on behind the scenes software-wise, so that you don't start getting calls and harried emails from people about, I've installed your font that I just bought and it doesn't work. What's going on? And luckily over the years, because I paid attention to all of this, we just never got those calls. I mean, people on the PC side, various versions of Windows, when they would, and no offense to PC users, believe me, but what would happen was we would get calls or emails from people, I just downloaded this font. I don't know where it is on my hard drive. Can you help me? Where did it end up? And so, that's another little rabbit hole that you can go down that can end up taking a better part of your day if you're not careful. So it's better to understand the technology as much as you can and stave off any potential problems. I like to think that we made some serious contributions in this, and a lot of it you can tell just by the way T.F. Bryn Mawr sets here. It's sort of self-evident, I think. For me, the result was that typography's full emotional appeal was finally unleashed. Now, it wasn't just the province of poster design, where fonts are often used, or in a logo or something like that, where you might only use several characters and large and all this. Now, all typography could benefit from that same natural fit. It was realized from time to time in headline photo typesetting that headliners and others were doing really from the late 30s and early 40s, when photo lettering first got into it, through the 50s, 60s, 70s. Because you're doing all that in a dark room, and you could control the spacing on your photo typositor or jet setter or whatever equipment you're using. But that all started to go away as things went digital on the Mac with DTP software, and all of a sudden it was going to be incumbent on the art director to understand this and how to put that back, and many of them don't. So I saw it as my responsibility to make the font's programming more complete by adding spacing so they wouldn't have to select -1, -3, -10 tracking. You wouldn't have to go back and fix kerning overall. There might be, like in a logo, there might be some cases where you're still going to want to adjust it even more, because you're really honing down on it at that. You're dealing with just a couple of characters. Just the same way you might convert them to paths, right? And then alter some of the characters to do what you might want to do in a logo. There's absolutely no reason why all of typography couldn't have had this. And there's so much emotional appeal in typefaces that it needed to be there. That was my view. And I called this Head and Body with Soul. And then I later summed it all up in a social media spot with Frank Romano that I happened to notice he was making some comments about how the economy was such, budgets were getting squeezed, and publishers were doing all kinds of wacky things to save money. And I had thought that I had taken care of all this.
Publishers are doing the craziest things to save money.
Books are changing because of inflation. They're finding ways to get more information on the page in order to have less pages in the book. They're changing the letter spacing, the negatively letter space, the copy. We'll tighten it up, which will add a few more lines to a page, cuts down on the number of pages. The next thing is to make the point sizes smaller.
But listen up. Treacy Faces solved this problem, saving publishers tons of money every day. Treacy Faces fonts have a uniquely beautiful, original look that delivers more. Saving space, saving depth, saving ink, saving pixels, saving money. It's why Frank put Treacy Faces out in front on Type World. Publishers, stop the craziness. Instead, specify Treacy Faces fonts at treacyfaces.com.
So you see, there's real-world impact for publishers by doing some of these things that I had introduced. Not everybody would take advantage of it. Everybody does their own thing, and sometimes people, don't get clued into how to save money, how to save depth, and all that. But that's what we did with our series. And as we added each new type family, I would try to bring that same differentiation to it. And then after that, I realized that as you add more faces to a type family, and over the years, we would come out with different kinds of specimens, brief specimens, fly sheets, things that resellers might put into their orders, the newspaper that you saw. We would do different kinds of things. And then around 2003, when we issued this one, where I was making even more of an attempt to show it in both text and display, it started to dawn on me, just as it had when I was looking at the Monotype library or the Adobe type library, just to pick on them for just a moment because they happen to have some of the biggest collections, right? The more, and you would see this out here in the museum. If you look at some of Linotype's old specimen books, like the wonderful Red book, for example, they're this thick. As wonderful as they are, and as wonderful as all these type specimens are, they take a certain amount of time to get through. And if you come at it from the art direction and graphic design side, like I have, where everything is on a deadline, but you've often got maybe 3 or 4 different deadline things that all have to be delivered simultaneously. And how are you going to get this done, right? If you're somebody that actually wants to keep differentiating their design work, like I've always felt that I wanted to, and deliver to my clients something that was really truly new and different for them as they go out and compete in their markets with their own competitors, who are often more deep-pocketed than they are, by the way. If you look at this from the standpoint that you're an underdog and you're working for underdogs, like many of my clients have been, it puts it in a different light. And you can come to see how important it is to continually go that extra step and differentiate more. So as I started looking at type catalogs, I'm thinking, these are wonderful, but who has the time, anymore? Unless you've got time to just sit and browse for a while. If you're on deadline, it can be really tough. So I started looking at how to do that. And over the years, as we were coming out with these print editions, and then when CD-ROMs first hit, there were opportunities to use Macromedia Director and other softwares that could write, and like Flash, Macromedia Flash, that ended up becoming part of Adobe. You could use softwares like this to create interactive type specimen books. And we did a number of those things. This is one that I put together that was published in a landmark book at the time called the Web Design Wow Book by Peach Pit Press. And so that was interesting. Our first website for Treacy Faces, for example, this is blown up from a small size, so I apologize for the lack of clarity in it. But it just is really meant to show layout and how I'm trying to adapt some of the A to Z specimens as blocks that were in some of our early type books to repurpose them for use online, without spending like an endless amount of time reinventing the wheel with it and getting it out there. They said, great, congratulations, look at all the variety that you're showing, but there's still inherent problems with forcing people to spend the time to go through it all, right, when they're on deadline. And, this actually has a psychological definition called the paradox of choice, where it's fairly universal that the more things you give people to choose from, like, in its most simplest form, a multiple choice question, right? The more options you give somebody, the more it slows them down. So I'm looking at this in the most, unwieldy multiple choice question kind of way, the type specimen book, and thinking, wow, what can I do about this? So at the time, mobile was becoming more important. You had early stages of web design. Mobile was coming in. It was very obvious, as it was talked about more, that mobile was going to become more and more important. And maybe things should be designed mobile first. This was by around 2010. And by 2018, shopping on mobile had become the most prevalent way that people were shopping. Video was becoming very important, not only on the desktop, but on mobile. What does that mean for the future of the type specimen book? These are the things that I was asking myself at the time. And so I designed what I think is the very first and fastest way to get through at least our collection of 500 faces of families and variations and see them in a wide variety of different ways. And not only does it have a very simple and straightforward selection and licensing or buying path, but it also has ways that you can spend more time to get more reassurance about whether or not these are the right typefaces for your project. Or, do I really want the book weight or do I want the bold weight or the extra bold weight? And you can type your own text and see it automatically. That's not new in and of itself. We started doing that in 1996. But the way we're doing it today in this is very new and fast and easy. And I've also incorporated what's called shoppable video in it, where, and this is something that we did ourselves in-house, where you can look at a video. I happen to be using videos from our Facebook page, brought them into this environment, and at the same time, you're not just looking at stills. If you have the time, you can also look at videos about it. And it's a first of its kind. So now, instead of spending hours or an afternoon, if you're trying to find something really different or new and different that you haven't used before, you can now find what you might like in 30 seconds or 90 seconds. So it's a real step forward for electronic type specimen books. And the other consideration was, well, what happens to the interface on the desktop versus mobile? So if you go to tracyfaces.com and you take a look at both on your phone and on desktop, you'll see how the interfaces are similar in some ways and different in some ways, because they really are two very different environments. And all of that had to be considered. This took about 5 years, I guess, to really work my way through it all. Along with the ability to design typefaces comes awesome responsibility, as I was intimating earlier, to your readers and to your customers. Choosing the right font. You also have a responsibility to your copywriter, by the way. I've had the opportunity to work with a number of really phenomenal copywriters over the decades at various ad agencies. And one of the things that you always want to make sure of is that you're not just like riding the latest trend. I've got to use that newest font, right? No matter what, I've just got to use that. Well, you want to make sure that its own tone of voice matches up to what the copywriter's intention was in how to help differentiate the client's products or services, right? It all has to knit together. And so you have that level of responsibility as well. You want to celebrate and make yourself a part of each new technology that comes out, but at the same time, and I've learned from experience this way, that as absolutely fascinating as these various technologies can be, they're often not permanent. The carpet, if you put too much time into making fonts for new technologies, like today it's variable type, right? There's a lot of programming that goes into that. A lot of thought about whether your design is getting hopelessly distorted as you go through these different mathematical or changes, that the software might lead you to. And so just looking this up on Google, for example, I found these reasons why to be careful about new technologies, as wonderful as they are. And believe me, I've tried them over the years and tried my own homegrown versions, like interpolating characters in freehand or Illustrator, for example, over the years. My little homegrown version of what goes on in some ways in multiple master or some of the other technologies like variable fonts. And, it's just fascinating to me to look back. Not everybody will agree with this, but it's just fascinating to look back and see what the potential was versus what people actually had time to use, right? You have to remember that your customer, the art director, graphic designer, packaging designer, whoever, their first allegiance is to their client and how much time and budget that client has given them. And for me, over the years, I've had some very big budgets and some very tight budgets and time frames to deal with. And so I've had a chance to, see a lot of it, the whole spectrum. And many people out there in working with type day in and day out just don't have time to get into some of the new technologies. I added optical sizing in fonts as a holdover from the metal type days. It's interesting for me to reflect on optical sizing in fonts where you would actually have different drawings for different point sizes, right? One of the reasons why this came about was because in those days, the 1700s, the 1800s, paper wasn't as fine quality. Super calendared paper didn't really exist. That's enamel glossy stock didn't exist, and it didn't exist with the quality that we've had since the 1980s. And so there was a lot of this problem called ink squash or ink spread. And this was brought up to me again by looking at these marvelous drawings here by Dwiggins in the 1940s. There's so much wonderful detail in this that was probably completely lost on the inked page, right? It's a terrible thing. So the other thing that happened with optical sizing was that as digital came in, and companies like ATF, American Type Founders, tried carrying over optical sizing into digital, suggesting that you needed different optical sizes. You would think of the largest sizes being the normal drawings, and then as you were descending in point size to smaller sizes, the drawings would have to get proportionally wider in order to keep the midsection of the letters or the counter shapes open to thwart the ink spread or ink squash. I mean, that's the simple-minded explanation of it. And so ATF found out the hard way that most people by the 1990s, into the 2000s, they're just not going to sit still for this anymore. And they were probably going to buy one version of most weights, some of the font family, not all of it. And, it's based on what they had the time and budget to do. So, I know that everybody might not agree with me on this, but I think as a type designer, trying to make a business and trying to make a profitable business, you have to understand where to jump ship, basically, when it comes to new technologies. You need to understand the constant interaction of positive and negative counter shapes. And this goes both to how words knit together, how things overall appear on the page. And I thought this was a terrific example from one of the fantastic speedball pen instruction books that they've come out with for decades. And there are wonderful pages on the internet about these, if you're not lucky enough to find copies of them at antique sales and things like that or on eBay. They're just wonderful. And this positive negative thing is always an interesting way to explain the importance of letter form design and how the interior or the counter shapes of the letters are just as important or sometimes more important than the outside of the shape or the overall shape itself. And some of that thinking is what I brought to bear over time with like the design of TF Bryn Mawr and TF Forever and the other faces. Understand how to improve readability. You know, it's all about readability and legibility, right? That's going to help your reader by comprehending and remembering the content more, right? If it's, and this goes hand in glove with the specialness or uniqueness of the design itself, right? It all works together. And here, again, this is another fascinating example from a speedball lettering book that, you know, just explains it, right? And you can see in the top example how, as with metal fonts, for example, some letter combinations would only fit just so closely together. Back in wood and metal, if they wanted to make something that hadn't been produced as a ligature, you'd actually have to get out a saw and saw the wood or saw the metal to make your own closed up ligature, so to speak, as you might need between like the capital P and A and T and A, as we talked before, whether it was a capital T and capital A or capital T and a lowercase a. And again, along with the natural fit comes the research that people tend to read things in chunks. You've often heard about speed reading and things like that. Well, the reality is that people do read by scanning chunks of words, right? So anything you can do as a type designer to help that along, including tighter fit and comprehensive kerning to go along with that, anything you can do to help that along is going to be a great thing. And, you know, as I've found in my own experience, it can lead to selling more fonts as well. Understand calligraphy and its influence on lettering and type design and layout overall. And these, you know, are just some of the interesting examples of it over the decades that you can find out more about on the internet, things that affected me. Edward Johnston in 1906 and his experimentations with modern calligraphy. Here's another, the Tips for Letterers is another calligraphic influence coming from actually how you hold the pen or how you hold the brush and how that contributes to stress in the letter forms themselves. You've noticed probably that some modern typefaces have like a capital O that is equal on both sides and seemingly vertical, whereas some older style faces will have the mean line angled a little bit, and the distribution of the thicks and thins will be similarly angled. A big influence for me back when I was in high school was finding Arthur Baker's book called Calligraphy, and I would recommend it and all of his books to everybody. Brush Calligraphy, here's another one. Just a phenomenal influence picking up, and that's not to say there aren't thousands and thousands of other calligraphers, but as you'll see in some of the issues of fine print out in the store area here, where many of calligraphers' best are featured over the decades. You know, from Edward Johnson to Arthur Baker, it's just an amazing transformation of understanding of how what can be done with letter forms. What are the possibilities, you know? Things that you might not want to necessarily set text in, but that are ways to make your layouts more fascinating. These are many of our clients over the decades. It's fascinating to me that Interbrand design over in the UK put my TF Forever as the logo on Wizz Air's planes for a while. TV and Satellite, which is a UK version of TV Guide, has been using they licensed the whole TF Forever series and have been using it for probably 10 years now, I guess. Every issue, not only for cover layout, but also throughout the inside. And one of the things that they chose it for was what I was talking about earlier, about how it saves space by using TF Forever as their text face throughout all the listings on the inside, similar to what you see in TV Guide over here, for example. They can do a lot more with layout. They have more space left over for photography and illustration that they might bring in from the studios, and any number of other kinds of products and services that my typefaces have been used on over the decades. So I thought you might find that interesting. Thanks for coming out.